Hello, students. Today we're going to be talking about what the Founding Fathers knew and the resources that they pulled ideas from that became part of our Constitution. So let's start by introducing the topic a little bit. We're going to talk about four main areas. We're going to talk about what they knew because of ancient Greece and Rome, what they knew because of the Enlightenment, what they knew because of English tradition, and what they knew because of experience and connections that they had already made and had kind of in their own personal lives. So let's talk about ancient Greece and Rome. Ancient Greece and Rome were fascinating to our founding fathers because of the way they were educated and because of the European education system at the time. Those systems were very focused on ancient Greece and Rome and the heritage that they brought to Europe. So, who invented democracy? Not one single person invented democracy that we have today, but the building blocks were created in the classical period and developed over centuries. The classical period covers the long history of the region that surrounds the Mediterranean Sea. Democracy was just one of the many different types of governments that the Greeks and Romans tried over the centuries. Political thinkers, including America's founding fathers, studied the history of these civilizations closely for lessons on government. And if you look up here, Athens was a city-state which was in Greece. And then later on, the Roman Republic, which is here is this green place, covered almost everything. So they didn't happen at the same time. We had Greece first and then Rome came after. So almost 2,500 years ago, the leader of Athens, a Greek city-state, decided to try something different, rule by the people or direct democracy. This kind of democracy required all of the citizens to participate directly in the actions of government. The assembly created laws and directed foreign policy, the council oversaw actions of the government, and the courts acted as policemen, judges, and jury. Back then, only the male citizens of Athens over 18 were considered part of the demos, or government. In Athens, the citizens had a hand in all of the decisions and actions of the government. The system only lasted about 200 years, but it made an impact on future civilizations. This approach worked as long as it did because Athens had a very small population that were considered citizens. This allowed for close cooperation. Another major civilization in the neighborhood was Rome. The Roman government had a larger territory and more people, so direct democracy didn't work. They would have to make some improvements without losing power of the people. So one of the big ideas that we get from Greece and Rome is that when citizens participate in government, they give their permission for that government to operate. Participation includes doing government like in Athens and voting for representatives like the Romans. In 508 BCE, the leaders of Rome wanted democracy, but they knew they'd never be able to get every citizen to participate in a government. So a republic was born. In a republic, the citizens elect representatives to run the government for them. These representatives were responsible to the people that elected them. The people still had power, but now it was handed off to a group of citizens that could act on their behalf. The Roman Republic lasted almost 500 years. And so you can see the influence of Greek democracy and Roman Republic in the government we have today. Even in the 1700s, America was too big to work as a direct democracy. The founding fathers established a system that gave power to the people and did so by electing representatives. The final product is called a representative democracy. So we've combined both that electing representatives like they did in Rome and democracy like they did in Greece. So the second one we're going to talk about is Enlightenment. So if you saw the slide before, that's Miss Larson's notes to herself to make sure I talk about all the things. But the Enlightenment was a changing of ideas and the way people thought about culture and government and religion. And it started in the early 1700s and really had huge effects going into the 1800s. But we're going to talk specifically about what it did for the founding fathers. And we're going to do that by talking about some specific people. So one of those people we're going to talk about is John Locke and his ideas on natural rights. So the Enlightenment was a period of time when people developed new ideas about human existence, including people's basic rights and the level of control they should have over their government and their futures. The Enlightenment began in Europe around 1715. People in cities like Paris gathered in salons, which is just a fancy word for like their houses, to discuss philosophy and ways to improve human experience. Many of their ideas were based in science and reason, which is why this time is also called the Age of Reason. Natural rights. Enlightenment thinkers believed that human beings are born with fundamental basic rights. These natural rights included right to liberty, life, property, and the freedom to find happiness. In order for people to enjoy these natural rights, other rights needed to be protected. Enlightenment thinkers believe that people should have the right to express themselves, to move around freely, and to petition the government. So you can see how they were learning about like the laws of nature at the time. And so then they applied the things they had learned about the laws of nature, physics, and the way the earth worked to human society. So they thought like, oh, if there are rules in nature that the plants and the animals and everything have to follow, then maybe there's rules in human society as well, and we should find out what they are. So they called these natural rights. If there was no government at all, people would live in a state of nature with no rules and complete freedom, but without any protection from each other. One Enlightenment idea was the social contract. Citizens give up some freedom they would have in a state of nature, like freedom to rob and to kill people. In exchange, the government protects citizens' right to life, liberty, and property. To Enlightenment thinkers, the relationship between a government and its citizens was like an agreement. Citizens agree to obey a set of rules, and the government agrees to protect citizens' rights. Enlightenment thinkers believed that governments had a responsibility to hold up their end of the social contract. If a government failed, then citizens would no longer agree to be governed, and they would have the right to revolt. And we see this remember Thomas Jefferson when he was talking about how the blood or the tree of liberty must occasionally be watered by the blood of tyrants and patriots. That's what he's talking about here, that if the government fails, citizens should revolt. This idea is known as consent of the governed. Traditionally, a government protected citizens from foreign invaders, but the government also had absolute authority over the people. A king ruled his citizens whether they consented or not. To Enlightenment thinkers, this was unacceptable. So they're changing the way they thought. People used to say that kings could just rule. We talked about divine right on Monday. But Enlightenment thinkers believe that this isn't true, that there should be a contract between the government and the people. Since the Middle Ages, European leaders had gained power through heredity or family ties. Kings and queens took the throne after another family member died. The people had no say in this process. Many Enlightenment thinkers believed in republicanism, the idea that a country's leader should be chosen by the citizens in a general election. Even so, some Enlightenment thinkers frowned on the idea of democracy. They feared what would happen if a mob of uneducated people had the power to vote. The brightest Enlightenment thinkers with names like Rousseau, Montesquieu, and Locke became very famous. They influenced leaders in Europe and became popular with Americans who wanted independence. When our founding fathers created a government for the new United States, they embraced many Enlightenment ideas. America's Constitution recognized that citizens were born with basic rights, and even though some of the founders agreed with those concerned about democracy, the Constitution gave citizens the power to vote. The Enlightenment ended around 1789, about the same time the Constitution was born. So let's talk about our third big idea, and this is English tradition. So back here behind this title slide, I have a picture of Parliament. Parliament is the name of of England's government, of their elected government. We're going to talk a little bit about that. So the first thing I wanted to talk about with this is a idea called common law. So in England, there's not a constitution. What happens is over time, laws are made and those laws sort of pile on top of each other to create thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of documents that kind of serve as the English Constitution. All of these individual decisions made by judges and made by people in Parliament equal common law, which is their kind of constitution. So Parliament is the name of their elected officials. Parliament actually has two houses. If this sounds familiar, it should. So in England, in Parliament, there's the House of Lords, which is hereditary, and the House of Commons, which is elected by regular people. So you can see in our country, in our Congress, we sort of mirrored that two-house system. We have our house, we have the Senate and the House of Representatives. This all came to be the way it was because of the English Civil War. So in England, they didn't like their king. This is after Queen Elizabeth. They didn't like their king, and so they actually beheaded him. And Parliament took complete control for like 50 years. And then they had another war and put another king in place. But this second time around, having a king didn't work any better than the first time. And so they eventually got rid of that king's son as well. And they created this, the Magna Carta. And it meant that in England, the law was more important than the king because the Magna Carta put a new king in control, but it was this Magna Carta, this law that did it. And it's the first time we see in kind of English tradition that they are writing out their laws. They have something that's above kind of everything else, and it's called the Magna Carta. We see that they mimicked this in the Mayflower Compact. So when our first pilgrims came over, they were like, oh, we don't have any laws in this new land. And so we're going to write some up. So there on the Mayflower, they wrote up like a little, this is how we're going to treat each other, and this is how we're going to make sure everything's fair. And we call it the Mayflower Compact. So all of these pieces, Parliament having two houses, common law building on itself over years and years and years and years, the English Civil War and overthrowing a king that's not being fair, the Magna Carta and making sure that law and the rule of law is more important than the rule of individual people, and the Mayflower Compact, which is actually here in the United States, but signed by Englishmen, are all pieces that were part of our founding fathers' heritage and part of their understanding of the world, and they are found in our Constitution, and we can see pieces mirrored there. Our last one I wanted to talk about was experience and connections. So first, I want to talk about the Iroquois. So the Iroquois Nation was right there, right next to our 13 colonies, right? They're just over the Appalachian Mountain, and they are the longest working representative government in the world. So in the Iroquois Nation, they elect or choose chiefs who then represent them in councils to help make decisions. And this working representative government had frequent contact with the founding fathers. Benjamin Franklin writes about them a lot. So one of the big questions that a lot of historians ask is how much impact Native American traditions have on one or another of the founding fathers. And I think, and I believe that they actually had a lot of impact on our founding fathers because our founding fathers and the colonists and eventually our Americans are like running up against these Native American traditions and governments all the time. And so we see some of those traditions and ways of working reflected in our Constitution. And then the final one I wanted to talk about was colonial government. So each colony had its own government, and most were representative democracies. So our colonists and our founding fathers had really up close personal experience with how representative democracies worked and ways that they worked well and ways that they didn't work well. We see this in the Mayflower Compact. We see this in the House of Burgesses. That is the name of the representative government in Virginia. And we see this in the Continental Congress, which many of our framers of the Constitution had participated in as well. So there are all of these pieces that they were able to pull into the Constitution and impacted the way the Constitution is today.